Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein. Georgia lawmakers are heading back to the Capitol in about a week for a special session that could reshape the state's political map again. Republicans say they're simply complying with a major U.S. Supreme Court ruling that weakened a key provision of the Voting Rights Act. Democrats say they're preparing to use that ruling to dismantle districts that help Black voters elect candidates of their choice. Either way, the outcome could alter the balance of power in Georgia politics, and we're going to dig into all of that today. AJC reporter Tamar Hallerman joins us in a few minutes to explain what the Supreme Court ruling actually did, why Governor Brian Kemp called lawmakers back now, and which districts could be affected. And later, Democratic State Representative Saira Draper joins us to discuss what options Democrats have once the map drawing begins. But first, Patricia Murphy, let's set the table. There are actually several items on the special session agenda. One is redistricting, which we're going to dive into today, but the other is a fix for Georgia's looming voting machine deadline to meet a July 1st mandate to replace the current system. That's going to be an undercurrent of the special session. The bigger fight, though, is over redistricting.
Yeah, the one that they could not put off was the voting machine question. They needed to get this done really before the next elections, and everybody in the Capitol knew that when they signed out for sine die. But the one that was a choice was this decision by Governor Kemp to redraw the lines after the Louisiana decision. They both are going to have a lot of debate. They're both going to cause a lot of consternation, even within parties as they happen. But it does feel like the redistricting piece was the sort of what they call a war of choice. And this is what Republicans are getting into and was heavily pushed by President Trump. And even at that point, base Republicans are asking for it. And this is what Governor Kemp has decided to do.
Well, joining us now to dive into that war of choice is Tamar Hallerman. She covers voting rights and elections for the AJC, has been all over this story. Tamar, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, well, Tamar, when we talk about political power shifting and the lines and the political boundaries, what are the biggest potential changes you're watching? We're talking not just about congressional seats, but also state legislative districts and all the way down to local lines.
Yeah, Georgia's a bit unique in terms of the southern states in particular that have jumped to action since the Supreme Court order to redraw political lines. Other states have really focused on U.S. House seats, members of Congress, getting those maps in place as soon as possible before primary elections. Georgia's a bit unique in that it's opened the door that it might consider some of these state House and state Senate lines. And of course, that opens up a giant bag of worms. We're dealing with interpersonal relationships in both chambers of the General Assembly, your friends, your enemies. Of course, you want to maximize your political power, but you also don't want to alienate your allies and your friends, even those across the aisle. So I will be closely watching all of those interpersonal fights. When it comes to the U.S. House in Georgia, of course, we are closely watching Sanford Bishop's Southwest Georgia seat. We know that's the top target of the GOP, but also some of those metro Atlanta seats held by Democrats. How much are Republicans going to try and tinker with those lines in order to get one, maybe two new districts out of that? Of course, by tinkering with those lines, you're going to impact all of the legislators who have seats around there. So you don't want to all of a sudden move safely Republican seats into toss-up districts if you are Republican leaders.
Yeah, Tamar, you make a great point because with redistricting, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. If you draw Democrats out of a tightly packed Democratic district, they will go into a Republican district just by definition. In the U.S. House seats in the metro Atlanta area, do you have a sense of which ones are most likely, if they do go in and start to redraw them, do you have an idea of which ones are most likely to be redrawn to be more Republican friendly and who that would affect if among the sitting members?
The district I'm watching the most closely is David Scott's former district, Georgia, House District 13. That kind of swoops around. It goes from the northeast Atlanta suburbs kind of all the way down into southwest of the city. Greg, correct me if I'm wrong there, describing that correctly. I'm going to be watching that just because that's an open seat right now. Of course, there's going to be a special election in July to fill that seat, but we're going to be talking about a freshman lawmaker who would be potentially easier to topple than an incumbent who's been there a long time. I will be interested to see how much Republicans may go go after somebody like Lucy McBath, who has a seat in the Northeast Atlanta suburbs. She's been around a couple of years. She's really been able to consolidate support, but maybe there's a way to kind of tinker up there as well. But Greg, you mentioned equal opposite reaction, or Patricia, I think you mentioned that. Republican incumbents also have gotten used to their districts. They know their voters. They know how to campaign there. If the district lines shift really suddenly, that could also create a lot of headaches for them. They have to build bridges with new communities. All of a sudden, if their safe seats become a little more of a toss-up, it's a lot more work for them. It could really change the political calculus for a lot of these incumbents.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, Marjorie Taylor Greene was none too happy that Cobb County deep blue precincts were drawn into her district. But Tamar, the difference here seems to be, we used to talk about redistricting as a decade-long process, right? You're drawing the lines in the first year of the new decade for the rest of the decade. In this case, though, you're drawing lines now for 2028, knowing that they'll just be likely redrawn in 2031 after the new census comes out. And frankly, Republicans have shown very little reticence in other states around the country, even to revisit them mid-decade. So there's a potential of another redistricting session. I doubt it'll happen, but even in a couple of years, the long-term planning is still in play here, but there's also much more of a short-term attitude towards it all.
Sure. And in the past, all of these would go to court to be litigated out. And I still am expecting challenges to these new lines. It just becomes a lot harder to challenge them, especially under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which the Supreme Court just significantly watered down. So I'll be curious to see if Democrats and other opponents to these new maps, what kind of tools they'll really have available. What's really effective at this point? Do they have much of anything beyond rallying their voters to send a strong message in November? How much of an avenue is the courts really these days? We're just going to have to see. Maybe there's a new strategy that comes out. Maybe you don't look at Section 2, but you try using something else. So I'll be curious to see about that. And as I mentioned at the top, a lot of these state house seats, I wonder how much legislative leaders will really want to be messing with that stuff this year, Greg, or do they want to wait for census information to come in closer to 2031? Do they just wait until next year when they can have a little bit more of an internal discussion? I will be curious to see.
That's a good point. They're dealing with rather stale census information at this point.
So, Tamar, we can't talk about this process without talking about how we got here with the Supreme Court decision on the Voting Rights Act. And it's not a subtext. It's really a central part of the conversation is the role that race plays in how the districts look now, how they will look in the future. And I love the piece that you did when you went down to Columbus and talked to State Representative Ed Harbison. He's the longest serving member in the state house now, of course, a Black, very well-known Black leader, not just in Columbus, but across the state. And I thought your conversation with him highlighted how incredibly personal and existential this fight will be for especially Black members in the legislature.
Yeah, Patricia, a lot of folks, Ed Harbison, but also many of the other Black legislators I spoke to for this piece, mentioned how their roles in the State House would not have been possible without the Voting Rights Act. Ed Harbison came of age during segregation and Jim Crow just outside of Montgomery, Alabama. He remembers the Montgomery bus boycotts. He remembers the first time he got his voter registration card after he came back from Vietnam. So it's kind of amazing to track the history of that through him specifically for this story. But a lot of Black legislators who all of a sudden are worried they could be drawn out of their seats, worried that Black voting power could be diluted. And, whereas before you had to consider race when you were drawing these legislative districts, it was written into the law. Now as long as you say it's partisan, you could do all sorts of things. So I'm going to be very interested to see how Republican leaders are going to be redrawing districts, especially in the Black Belt, Patricia, especially when it comes to these state house seats. I'm looking in Columbus. I'm interested in what they do in Macon. I'm interested in what they do outside of Augusta. I feel like that area of the state is where we could see a lot of upheaval in the state house and state senate. So I'll be closely watching those areas, especially even smaller cities like Albany, where you might have ripe pickings for one or two standalone majority-minority districts that Republicans could easily redraw and get a Republican in there.
Let's talk about the Republican pushback tomorrow, because Republicans are arguing essentially that politics today is driven more by party than race, and that voters shouldn't be sorted into districts based on racial dynamics, racial considerations. Democrats say that that's bull, right? Essentially saying that this is Republicans seizing power, using this ruling as a power grab. How much is this fight really about race, and how much is it about just partisan advantage?
Greg, those dynamics are kind of hard to untangle at this moment, because especially when we're looking at the South, racial politics and partisan politics are so entwined in certain respects. So it's hard to kind of tease that out. And you're so right. You hear Democrats saying you can't. It's not only about partisanship, because it so closely mirrors race. And then what do you do if the best tool that you had to challenge all those things, the Voting Rights Act, is severely weakened? So I'm going to be interested to see, is this really is it going to come down to messaging in the lead up to November? Is this all just about campaigning, or are there new legal avenues that are going to be available to Democrats to be able to challenge this stuff? Or is it really about revving up your voters to send a message to the Republican majority in November?
Tamar, you mentioned Albany, you mentioned Columbus, you mentioned some of these areas you're watching. Of course, we're watching Sanford Bishop's district in West Georgia and what could happen to the late David Scott's district in East Atlanta. What else are you most closely watching heading into this special session? Because it is the day after the runoff. There's a lot of just interesting questions. Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, he's in the runoff. What if he wins? He's the gubernatorial nominee for the Republican Party. If he loses, of course, he is on his way out, but he still presides over the state Senate for this special session. It's going to be such a weird special session.
It really is. You mentioned the potential for a lame duck lieutenant governor, especially if he loses in this runoff. But even if he wins, we're talking about folks who have lots of allies, but also enemies in state government. Do you use this as a moment to punish or reward folks? We have a lame duck governor. How much of a role does he want to play in this on his way out to cement his legacy, to punish his enemies? We have a lame duck Secretary of State. We have a lame duck Attorney General. I'm definitely going to be watching those dynamics to see what happens. As I mentioned, kind of folks who may be losing their seats. What happens to them as they kind of fight for their political lives? How upfront are they going to be about a lot of this stuff, especially if they get the sense, I'm thinking Democrats, if they get the sense that they are being drawn out of their districts, either before or after these maps come out? What do we hear from Sanford Bishop? We've heard very little at this point. He mentioned, I trust, my fate is in the hands of our great legislature where he once served. Do we hear any more from him? What do we hear from Republicans in neighboring districts who have worked with him, who have been friendly with him over the years? Yeah. Do they stick their necks out at all to try and save somebody like Sanford Bishop? And then there are the Democrats. I was at a Legislative Black Caucus presser a couple of weeks ago, where folks talked about wanting to get the business community involved in this fight. They'd mentioned how the business community was very vocal during the civil rights era, and how they felt like it's been pretty absent overall in this debate so far. This special session comes during the World Cup, when the eyes of the world will be on Atlanta. How much do Democrats and other opponents of these maps try and whip up public backlash to this? Will there be protests? What kind of messaging will there be? Will they be able to get any attention in the noise of this moment? We would have just had the runoffs. Like I said, World Cup will be distracting a lot of folks. It's summer vacation. Folks are gone. Kids are out of school. Are you able to cut through the noise and get this messaging through? Are you going to be able to send a message? These are all things I'm going to be watching closely.
Well, you just asked about 47 questions. And actually, the interesting thing is we'll have a lot of the answers in the next week or two. So thank you so much for joining us. And I know you'll be diving into all this. You can follow all of Tamar's coverage at ajc.com, also on her social media feeds, all that good stuff. Tamar, thank you.
Anytime.
When we come back, State Representative Saira Draper will be inside that Capitol on June 17th. We're going to ask her what Democrats can actually do when they're in the minority and what she's watching most closely as this fight unfolds. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy. Hey, Patricia.
Hey, Greg.
Reminder, if you've got a question you'd like to ask us here on Politically Georgia, you can call our hotline anytime, day or night, leave a question, and we'll play it back and answer it right here on the show during our Monday mailbag segment. The number is 770-810-5297. You can also email us politicallygeorgia@ajc.com. We can't wait to hear from you. State Representative Saira Draper, a Democrat from Atlanta, has been one of the sharpest Democratic voices on redistricting and election law under the Gold Dome. And Representative Draper joins us right now. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's talk about the reality that Democrats face, because Republicans, of course, control the governor's office. They control both chambers of the legislature. You're getting ready for this special session where we are expecting at least 2 congressional seats to be redrawn to favor Republicans, several more legislative seats. What can Democrats actually do to influence this process beyond simply objecting to it?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of moral outrage about what is going on, especially across the Deep South. And we've seen very unexpected things happen. I mean, we saw South Carolina Republicans coalesce with Democrats to try and save one of those congressional seats for Democrats. Of course, they were ultimately unsuccessful. But that was a, alignment that we weren't necessarily expecting to see. So I think, one of the most important things that we can do as Democrats here in Georgia, as we are about to embark on our own redistricting battle, is just not be resigned. Like, I think there's a lot of things that can happen during this special session that's coming up next week. And look, I don't think that Republicans have huge margins. We're in the middle of summer. I know it's tough for people to get to this, hastily called special session. So I don't know what kind of margins we're looking at with the Republican-Democratic divide. Of course, they need 91 votes to pass redistricting. And I think the other thing that we have to remember is that there's going to be a lot of Republicans that by voting for this map, they're going to make their chances of reelection in November much, much harder. So I don't think it's a given that every Republican that is present is going to vote for this map, especially if they want to be reelected in November. So we cannot be resigned. We need to know that there is hope to getting these things not to pass. And to do that, we need to make sure we're sending out messages across Georgia that the process is corrupt, that this is a autocratic power grab. This is ruled by the minority. This is a Republican Party that is so intent on staying in power. They don't care how they do it. They don't care whose votes they're squashing. And that is the message we need to send, because if they are successful at passing these maps now in June, they need to pay for it at the ballot box in November.
One quick follow-up. You really think there's Republicans, swing voters, that would defect from the GOP, even when this is such a big Republican issue?
Well, I don't think we can assume that's not the case. Because I think it's honestly quite stunning to me that the governor has elected to do the special session now before November, because I think the very real consequence of this is that he is throwing several of the legislative members under the bus. He could have chosen to do redistricting in December after the November elections and not saddle this very controversial issue on those most vulnerable Republicans in swing districts. He could have done it. For some reason, he did not choose to do this in December. He's choosing to do it now. So as a result of that, he's putting these Republicans who are in swing districts in a very, very difficult position. Either align yourself with your party and pass these maps and possibly lose in November, in what's already a very difficult environment for Republicans, or don't vote with your party, perhaps win in 2026, but become persona non grata in your party.
So which Republicans are you thinking about specifically? Let's talk about the districts that you are seeing could be in the situation. Which Republican lawmakers you think could be in danger if the governor moves forward with this, as obviously he's fully expected to? And are you having any conversations with Republicans that seems like even a single person has cold feet about this?
So I'm thinking about, there's probably 10 seats that are vulnerable right now. I'm thinking of the Deb Silcoxes. I'm thinking of the Matt Reeves in Gwinnett County, the Scott Hiltons in Gwinnett County. These are folks who are campaigning year round because they know how precarious their hold on their districts are. A lot of these folks are in Democratic leaning districts, but through redistricting that we had last session, we're able to hold down. I'm thinking of Sandy Donatucci, also in Gwinnett County, who won a really, really close race. These are folks who both are in districts that are very likely to be flipped already because of the blue wave that we've seen coming for the last 18 months. But also they live in districts where constituents are very in tune with civics, with local politics and will be following this issue and will understand the ramifications of this issue. I mean, they understand the corruption that's happening here, right? It's not some quick talking points that are going to persuade them that redistricting was necessary. And can I just make that point? Because what we saw in Louisiana was a court order that said your maps are unconstitutional, you have to pass new maps. And that's why Louisiana moved straight away and passed new maps. But that is not the case in Georgia. I just want to make that super clear. Anybody that is telling you that we have to pass new maps right now, they are lying to you. There is no need, there is no court order that says that our maps are currently unconstitutional, that we are required to pass new maps. So this haste to do it is something that is really beyond me. It doesn't make a lot of sense politically from the Republicans' perspective. And I don't know who is pressuring the Republicans to do this, but it just does not make a lot of sense from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, and that certainly has been the line we've heard from Republicans, including Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who told me that in his view, these maps are now illegal and they have to redraw them, even though you're right. The Supreme Court ruling ordered Louisiana to redraw the maps, but not necessarily other states using these. And
sorry to interrupt you, Greg. I mean, our maps are literally right now, they're sitting at the district court. Like, we have had litigation over our current maps. They went to the Court of Appeals. They're probably, if they haven't already been remanded to the district court, they are going to be remanded to the district court. So there's literally pending legislation to determine whether or not our current maps are constitutional or unconstitutional. For them to say that they're unconstitutional right now, we need to change them. That is just not the case.
And we're hearing that sort of frustration bubble up very privately from some Republicans, not yet publicly yet, saying, hey, we don't need to do this. We don't need to jeopardize our own hides at this point. But Representative, I want to ask you about this because, I went with, I was covering Jason Estevez during the end of his campaign, and there was a door knocking. So I kind of tagged along with some door knockers to hear what voters were asking about. And I joined you for a couple of those door knocks. And I guess I shouldn't have been, sometimes in politics, you get used to voters tuning out certain things. But in this case, of all the houses that you guys visited and your team visited, many of them are very, very aware of redistricting. I went out to Gwinnett County to write about the Senate runoff between Ruha Roman and her opponent, Raul Garabadu. And same thing, voters very tuned into this issue. Democrats hope this will be a turnout accelerant. Are you seeing that play out also in the November election? Because obviously there was high turnout in the May primary, but do you think this will continue to be a galvanizing effect in November?
Oh my gosh, yes. And let me tell you, I mean, while I was campaigning for my primary, I was at churches all over my district, including South DeKalb and in Clayton County, and the Black churches in particular. I mean, they are so galvanized. They're so passionate about this issue. They understand the historical context, how it has affected their rights in this country, how they have been making progress in this state. And this is just two steps backwards. This is a turn in the wrong direction. And they are very aware of that. I think we are, and the message is go vote. The message is go vote. This is how we overcome it. We go vote. So I think people are talking about it all over the state. And I've said the word corruption several times, but I want to make clear that is what this is. This is a case of a party that is going out of power. And instead of pivoting by changing their policies to make their policies more aligned with the general population and try and win that way, they want to win by changing who votes for them. So this is corruption. This is anti-democratic. And I think it's the only way they can win. And that's why they're pushing for this.
Let's also talk about the other reason for this special session. It does feel like the original reason that the session was called is being a bit, I don't want to say overshadowed because they're two very important issues, but we're not talking as much about the voting machines that are here in Georgia. The legislature passed a bill requiring that those change after July 1st and also recessed without having any solution as to what to do with those voting machines. That is also supposed to be addressed in the special session. What are your concerns about where that stands right now, and what do you want to see happen?
My concerns are that issue is further politicized. I think right now, because we're in June now, we're a few months before a major election in November, we do not have the luxury of time to make any big changes to our election system. So to me, the common sense solution is the solution that we proposed back during the session, which is just to delay the implementation of eliminating the QR codes from our ballots. The bill that we passed in 2021, we had 2023, excuse me, whenever it was. We had 2 years to implement it. We failed to implement it. Well, you can't do it now. We've just simply run out of time. So we have to delay that implementation until after November. And I think after November, we can look at all the possible options that there are, and we can weigh them, and we can see what's best for Georgia going forward. I would love to be involved with that process and hope that I am. But we've simply run out of time. So the only reasonable solution, in my view, is to delay that implementation. And to the extent everybody is looking for a reasonable solution, I think that is the conclusion that everyone is going to draw. But if folks want to continue to politicize this, I guess they can do that. And that will cause chaos in our elections. And, that leads to lower voter turnout. So to the extent people are politicizing this, you have to ask, is your intention to create chaos? Is your intention to create lower voter turnout? And I think those are the hard-pressing questions that we need to be asking as well as y'all.
And it seems like the consensus among Republican leaders is to push for that delay rather than do a massive restructuring. But we also know anytime you open up that code section, anytime you get into any sort of lawmaking session, special or otherwise, it could lead to all sorts of other actions involving the election code. Representative, I want to get back to redistricting too, because for people listening who live in districts that could be redrawn, what should they be watching for over the next few days, week or so? How can they tell whether a map is being drawn fairly or whether their community is being split apart for political reasons? And I ask that also because we still don't have drafts of any maps, and we might not have them until right before the special session.
Well, let me clear up any kind of disillusion that this is about fairness or keeping communities together or about a transparent process. No, we have not seen maps yet. We are 10 days out from the special session. We did get an email. We've received basically one communication from the Republican Party about the upcoming redistricting session. And it was from the chair of the redistricting committee, who basically said, look, I'm an open book. If you want to book a meeting with me, come talk to me. I want to talk to you about your concerns about these maps and redistricting. And, if that's not a CYA email, I don't know what is. I mean, they know they're going to get sued, so they want us to have this paper trail to show, look, we tried to make this very open. We tried to make this available for everybody to talk to us if they had concerns. But the fact of the matter is, how am I supposed to raise concerns if I can't see the map? And there's no rules or guidelines that have been issued about what process they are following. Are they trying to keep cities together? Are they trying to keep, certain boundaries together? There's no guidelines. So how can I assess whether they are treating me fairly when I don't even have the guidelines in front of me? That's number one. But I think, look, they wouldn't be rushing to do this. This is the third time now that we've redistricted since the last census. That in and of itself makes things inherently unfair. To really do a fair redistricting, we'd have to see where the population has grown, where it has decreased. We'd have to draw our districts based on that. Of course, we don't have that information because the census was several years ago. So any kind of, suggestion that this is intended to be a fair process, democratic process, representative process, no. The only intent of this is to give the Republican Party maximum political advantage. And that's going to mean a bloodbath for Democrats. When we walk in there, when they finally release the maps, many of us are going to have our formerly Democratic-leaning districts now Republican-leaning. Maybe several of us will be drawn out of our districts. Maybe they will remain Democratic, but they've decided to draw us out of our districts. I'm no stranger to this. In 2023, I ran an election where I had been paired with a Democratic incumbent, and we were forced to run against each other because of redistricting. So not only are they going to change districts as many as they can from Democrat to Republican, they might engage in some shenanigans, draw folks into the same districts so that for the next 2 years now, we're basically campaigning against each other and distracted from the work that we should be doing for the people. So there's a lot of possible, things that can happen. But no, we don't have any idea what's coming. There's been no transparency in this process whatsoever. And that's by design.
Do you anticipate that if these maps are drawn, there will be a legal challenge from the Democratic caucus?
Yeah, I think there is. And look, I don't want to say that there's no chance for litigation going forward because there's some chance perhaps. But look, we don't get voting rights reform without reforming the Supreme Court, because the problem that we're going to have is now we have these laws that really are toothless. And if we were to pass new laws in Congress, we have a Supreme Court that's going to invalidate them. So we are just in this kind of perpetual cycle where we have nowhere to turn. And the only thing that we can do is just vote, have everybody vote as much as possible. And like so many of the tactics, they are attacking voting rights on so many different levels. Whether it's asking for the voter lists, whether it's these executive orders that are changing how we vote by mail. They're trying to both decrease the turnout and change the maps so the politicians are choosing their voters. So every angle that they can attack this they are. North Carolina is a state where it has heavy Republican control in the legislature, but of course the statewide seats are controlled by Democrats. Maybe that's something that Georgia becomes in the future if they are successful at passing these maps, because you can't gerrymander statewide, right? You can't gerrymander statewide. So we'll see what happens in the future. But look, the possibility of litigation, it was hard before, and it is much harder now after Calais.
One last question before we let you go on that. If Keisha Lance Bottoms wins the governor's race, it's a lot of ifs, and she has the leverage of being the top executive in the state. What do you think Democrats should do if she wields that? Because of course these maps will already be in the books, but could she wield any leverage? Could she use any sort of threats to hold back other legislation if these maps aren't changed again?
Yeah, look, I'd love to be in the situation where both we have Keisha Lance Bottoms as our governor, and perhaps we have a Democratic majority in the House and maybe even the Senate. Why not? And look, if we had a trifecta, we could change the maps back. Short of having the trifecta, yes, I think the governor has a lot of power, a lot of leverage, and could, negotiate new maps, perhaps that wouldn't be as strong as if it were a Democratic trifecta, but less bad than what they would be under a Republican trifecta. So I think that is the best case scenario. And I want to make very clear to the public, to Georgians, that if you think what is happening right now is wrong, the critical window that we have to really impact change is November 2026. Because once these new maps go into effect in 2028, the chances of flipping the legislature, of bringing any kind of balance to the legislature is gone. It's not entirely gone, but it becomes much, much more difficult. So if people have a problem with what's going on, they have to show up to the ballot box in November. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that we now have a primary runoff going on. The election's next Tuesday and early voting has already started. So, get that voting muscle, work it out, and go ahead and vote in the primary runoff as well.
Well, Representative Draper, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you enjoy what you heard, please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform, and share Politically Georgia with a friend. It really helps others find our show and join the conversation. We'll talk to you next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.